Hey, how's it going, everybody? Scott Spreitzer here. He's Amal Shaw. We are against the spread with Spreitzer and the Shaw, brought to you by DocSports.com, and talking about 7 football games, 4 from college, 3 from the pros. And man, we got some real juicy matchups to talk about this particular week. We'll also give you our best bets at the end of the show, all that good stuff, and some thoughts and opinions on the games as we go along. Before we jump into it, you can see that banner at the top of your screen that says "Get a free $60 account." It is just that. You click on the link below the video, you get yourself set up for the free $60 account, which you can then use on any of my daily packages, any of Amal's daily packages over at DocSports.com. You can put 30 on one of mine, 30 on one of his, whatever floats your boat, you can do. And that's if you're not yet a member at Doc Sports. And basically what this does is it gives you a good feel, a good trial run, if you've not been with Doc Sports, of what's offered over there on our homepages at DocSports.com. Well, Amal, we got some good games to talk about. Real quick, I wanted to say that, last week was real nice for me on Saturday. I lost on Sunday, 4-3 overall in football, but hit the 8-star play on Georgia Tech. The earlier plays, I ended up sweeping in college football last week. The earlier plays in the day, Amal, were easy winners. I mean, easy winners. Had the over by 30 points in Western Michigan, had Vanderbilt over Bama. I'd love to say I had the money line, but it was against the spread. And then on Saturday night, of course, the 8-star is going to be tough, but we'll take them any way we can get them. And we were down 14-10, laying 9.5 in the fourth quarter, but came back to win that game and cover by a point or half a point, depending on when you got the number. But not a bad week overall, and we're on a 39-16 run. I hope you're doing well too, sir. What's going on for Amal Shaw over at DocSports.com?
Yeah, I've been doing well. Ended up with my top college football play cashing on the Pitt Panthers against North Carolina. But nice. I tell you, wound up with a bad push in the Jacksonville Indy game. Has laying 3 in that one on my top play, and they were up by 14 with 6 minutes to go. And in about 8 plays, they allowed the Colts to go from down 14 to a tie game, and they end up kicking the game-winning field goal for the push. But, look, got a great opportunity coming up this weekend. Excited about some great games on tap. And college football, NFL have been pretty good to me so far this year. Let's continue that trend.
Yeah, I had a real nice chance at a really good weekend because my top play in the NFL was a 5-star, and it was bright and early in London. It was on the New York Jets plus the points over Minnesota. They ended up losing by 6 in that game. And boy, it was Aaron Rodgers looking every bit of 40 years old with 3 picks, including inside the 10-yard line late in the game, and he threw his third. And of course, now we see when you mess with Aaron Rodgers and you're the New York Jets organization, you're going to get a little blowback. And the rumor, at least some of the thoughts out there right now, as of Wednesday afternoon, was that Aaron Rodgers was told Robert Saleh was going to can Nathaniel Hackett. And you know what happens when you mess with Aaron Rodgers or one of his buddies, whether he stinks at this point of his career or not. Ownership sided with the quarterback. See you later, Robert Saleh. At least that's what it looked like. On Monday, the guy is preparing in his office with his assistants to take on this week's opponent. And then we find out that, he dared raise his voice against Nathaniel Hackett. See you, Robert Saleh, great defensive coordinator. There was nothing wrong with that Jets defense, Amal.
No, you're absolutely right. If you think about it, they haven't even given up 20 points all year. Remember, the Vikings scored 23 because of a pick 6 by Van Ginkel against Rodgers. You mentioned Rodgers. I don't recall a game where I've ever seen him have such errant throws. You look at the interceptions. The last one was a pretty good play, but an underthrow. The second one was just a very high throw. The one by Van Ginkel, I thought that was a better defensive scheme more than anything else. But give him credit. They pick him off 3 times. The opportunities they had, they cashed in on. Did a great job there. But Saleh, he was kind of always on the fence. And Rodgers is a bit cryptic in the way he is in certain things. But one other thing, look, I think Rodgers is one of the all-time greats. I really do in terms of his accuracy, what he's been able to do. But I don't like his emotions out in the field. Anytime somebody messes up a play, you don't see any of the quarterback react as negatively as we've seen him so far this year with the Jets. So just something to pay attention to going forward. And it's really, the defense has still been there, but it's the offense that's been sputtering.
All right, well, we'll talk some NFL in just a bit. Let's kick things off with an interesting college matchup in Boulder, Colorado. And this game goes late, 10:15 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday night. Kansas State coming to Boulder. They're laying 4 for the most part, 56.5 the total. I've seen a couple of 3.5s on a Wednesday afternoon, but again, 90% of the books on my line service are showing 4. You know what, Colorado has their confidence back. There's no doubt about that after that blowout loss against Nebraska when they looked pathetic in the trenches on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They did completely luck out against a Baylor team that's 0-4 against teams not named Tarleton State or Air Force. The upset of Central Florida, they got that in their win column, but UCF outgained Colorado, but they committed 4 turnovers in that game, and it's the same UCF team that then lost to a struggling Florida Gators program. So I'm looking at Colorado. Yeah, the confidence is back. They've still got 2 top 10 draft picks, obviously, and Hunter and, of course, Deion's kid at quarterback, but they're 126th in rushing yards gained per game. And they're bad on defense still, equally bad against the run or the pass. And Kansas State is a better team. In fact, Amal, I actually make to this day Kansas State 4 points better than Nebraska on a neutral field. And we saw what Nebraska did to Colorado. Your thoughts?
First of all, I think the odds makers have overreacted on some of these lines, particularly with Colorado. Let's start back with the Baylor game. I remember when they lost that game, I said, this is going to be a game that defeats Baylor twice. They fall behind 21-0 against BYU. They lose that game at home. Colorado has the momentum for that. They go down to Orlando. They win that game against UCF in dominant fashion. Scott, I never understood that line. I was on Colorado in that game. I thought it was too high. Listen, there's a reason why Sam Pittman didn't allow him to run Bobby Petrino's offense. He's just not that good. And you saw it when they went to Gainesville this past weekend. Kansas State on the road in Provo was a 6.5, 7.5 point favorite in that game. I think as high as 7.5. I didn't understand. I thought that line was too high. You're trying to tell me at this point in time that the odds makers believe that Colorado is better than BYU? I don't see it. I think this number is wrong. I think it's too short. I like K-State here. Look, I'm not a big Avery Johnson fan. I'm a huge Giddens fan. I think he's one of the best and most underrated running backs in college football. I like Kansas State here. They're the more complete team. Look, Colorado's a nice story. Deion Sanders gets a ton of clicks, or the Dan Lanning line, but a lot of publicity because he's one of the all-time great players of all time. That's a repetitive statement, but my point being is that when I look at this matchup, Kansas State is the more complete team. Look what they did defensively against Oklahoma State. Look what they did against Arizona. Noah Fafita and McMillan. Those guys are as good of a passing combination as you'll find in college football. Give me K-State here on the road, laying 4.5. I got no qualms with this one. I'd be comfortable, Scott, up to 6, 6.5 in this game. I like the Wildcats to go into Boulder and win this game.
Yeah, and I like your comparison to BYU to that number. And, folks who, if you didn't watch the game and you saw the final score, it was misleading. Kansas State, over the final 2 minutes of the first half after being up, gave up like 17 points over 2 minutes. And it was just mistake after mistake. Basically, what we saw there was just every potential mistake a football team could make, they made. And it carried over to the first few minutes of the second half. BYU just scored a ton of points in about a 6-minute span of game time. I like the over here, by the way, K-State and Colorado. I think there will be quite a few points put on the board. This next game, I still call it the Red River Shootout. Couple of reasons. I'm old school. Second reason, it is a lot easier to say than Red River Rivalry with all those R's. But anyway, Texas laying 14.5 in this particular game. That total sitting at 50.5 now. It's up a point from where it was just a day ago. Looks like Quinn Ewers is going to start this week. That's what they're talking about in Austin. First time in about a month. I don't know that it makes a difference because it's this really fierce Texas defense, I think, that will go a long way towards a potential national title. They allow just 7 points per game. They still haven't allowed a single point in the opening quarter of play all season. So they've never had to chase anybody yet. And some will say that the defensive numbers came against a soft slate. Part's true, no doubt about it, but they've yet to face a quality offense. And I'm not so sure Oklahoma is a quality offense at this point, Amal.
I would agree with you there. I think you make a lot of good points when you look at Texas right now. And I do agree with the argument that Texas hasn't played anybody yet. Michigan is one-dimensional. Mississippi State, at this point in time, they might as well be an FCS team. And Colorado State has not been what people anticipated. But you got to give the Horns a ton of credit so far, what they've been able to accomplish. With that being said, Scott, I can tell you right now, I've been to about 10 of these games when I was covering them in Dallas. This is, to me, the best rivalry in college football because it's played at a neutral site. When I look at the number at 14.5, seems a little bit high. I get that Texas is a much more dominant team offensively than Oklahoma is. The offensive line I have some concerns with. I think the line play for OU is going to be key. Can they keep the pressure off of Hawkins? If they can do that, his mobility will present some challenges. I think this is a game I would look towards the under or Oklahoma here, Scott, but more preferably the under. Texas is capable of winning this game by a large margin simply because I don't know if Oklahoma's got the firepower. But I think still this team defensively is good enough to be able to negate some of the things Texas will look to do. Revenge spot for the Horns here. Remember Venables and company got them last year, 34-30. That was a big win after getting embarrassed the previous year, 49-0. But I think the number's a little bit high when you look at this rivalry right now. Total of 50.5. I know Texas put up a ton of points, but you go to the defensive point. Both teams defensive-minded. I think it's going to be one of those games that Horns probably in that 27-14 type of range.
Yeah, I'm with you on that total. I like the under here. I liked it even more when that total, crossed 50 and got up to 50.5 now. I do look at the Sooners. I mean, they have been outgained by 320 yards the last two games. They gained just 4.5 yards per play and 2.5 yards per carry in those two games. And you look at Auburn, I mean, they had their chances. They were stopped at the OU 1 yard line. They missed a couple field goals. OU had that 60-yard pick six in a 6-point game. I do believe that Oklahoma's defense and the Texas defense are going to be solid forces this week. And I don't like that Oklahoma offense. So I'm with you on the under. Let's stay in the SEC. It's Ole Miss laying 3.5, total 62 at LSU. The line was 2.5 in a few books, 3.5 now in most. They just took on top 25 power rated teams in back-to-back weeks, talking about the Rebels, and probably should be 2-0, but did lose that game to Kentucky. The win over South Carolina, by the way, was impressive. The Gamecocks do nothing against this Rebel defense, as far as I'm concerned. LSU has had a soft schedule. Or I should say the Gamecocks did nothing against Ole Miss. Obviously, that was last week. But LSU has played a soft schedule. They played USC, South Carolina. They were the two tests. And USC isn't looking all that hot of a victory at this point. Ole Miss completely shut down South Carolina, which I started to allude to there. While LSU was fortunate to win that game against the Gamecocks, they scored the game-winning touchdown with about a minute to go in the game, won that game 36-33. I don't like to play syllogism, A plus B equals C, so B plus C equals, that kind of stuff that we learned in college. But at the same time, I think you can take a lot from that common opponent. And I got to go with Ole Miss here. I know it's one of those spots where, man, it's like playoffs are almost on the line at this point for LSU, but I still think Ole Miss gets the job done.
I would agree with you. I'm going to lay the points here with Ole Miss in this match. A couple factors for me. I like Nussmeier. I think he's a pretty solid quarterback, but I don't think he's quite as effective as maybe some other people believe or like. And then the other concern I have is you look at Cade Dunham, the freshman running back. He's been outstanding, but he's banged up. He's going to practice this week. Let's see how effective he can be against this Ole Miss team. I want to go back to that South Carolina game you referenced. That was a game in which the reality was LSU should have won the game. It was poor coaching by Shane Beamer's team. For people that are unfamiliar, LSU's got the ball about 6-7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. They throw an interception. It's returned for a touchdown by South Carolina. Would have put South Carolina up by 2 scores at that point, Scott. But there was a personal foul penalty on one of the defensive ends going after the quarterback after the INT. No need for that over-aggressive play. Cost them the touchdown, cost them the game. They would have won that football game. This is not a great LSU team. Just don't see the consistent firepower. I think Ole Miss's offense will create some problems. I think a lot of people got down on Ole Miss after the loss against Kentucky, but Mark Stoops, why are we surprised? He holds Georgia in check under 20 points. This is something he's done historically. He's been a great defensive coach. And so, it doesn't come as much of a shock when you look at this is a pretty short number. I think this offense presents some problems. The defensive line is better for Ole Miss. Nolan came over from A&M, the defensive end, Walter Nolan there. This is a pretty good team. I like Ole Miss here, laying 3.5. I got no problem laying it up to 4. Rebels on the road win this game.
Yeah, and I think I said LSU's close win over USC obviously meant close loss against USC, and of course USC. Boy, you pop them in the nose, and that's a team that'll wilt like we saw in the fourth quarter against Michigan and Minnesota. Ohio State and Oregon, interesting battle in the new Big Ten. Ohio State laying 3 and 3.5, depending on where you shop. That total at 53.5. Saw a couple of 4.5s when this game popped up on the openers and a couple of books that get out in front of it. And then a little bit of the money and tickets came in on the Ducks. They have won 11 straight home games. And it seems like the number one most asked question of them all, have these two teams been holding back? I've heard it from both angles when it comes to this matchup. Have they treated their first month of the season like preseason? I look at Oregon. I've watched a couple of their games. And as far as they're concerned, yeah, maybe they held back after building a lead against UCLA. They dialed it down. They were up 28-3 in the second quarter. but I don't think they could dial it down against Boise. They only won that game by 3, and I don't think they dialed it down against their in-state rival Oregon State when they won by 5 touchdowns. Maybe the Buckeyes have dialed it down a little bit over the fourth quarter or so against Michigan State, but they did show kind of a new, I guess, wrinkle or addition against the Hawkeyes last week, and that was letting Will Howard call his own number a few more times when it came to running the football. It's a little bit something extra for Oregon to prepare for this week because earlier in the season, he wasn't doing that much at all against soft opponents.
He's 6'5", 240 pounds. He's a big guy at quarterback. He presents some problems. That third down and 4, everything's covered up, and now you got to go out and stop these guys. I'm going to tell you right now, I think Ohio State's the play here. They have the number 1 scoring defense in college football. Yes, the argument simply can be made. They haven't played too many teams from an opposition standpoint. And I think you look at most of the games, there have been a drive they've given up. Now, Iowa had their starters in against the backups to get the touchdown with Caleb Johnson. But other than that, this team has been dominant. Look, I know everyone loves Ryan Williams at Alabama, the freshman receiver, but Jeremiah Smith is a grown man playing wide receiver for the Buckeyes. 6'3", 220, made out of granite. And, we've already seen 3 great one-handed catches from him. Egbuka's come on. On the flip side, you can't ignore what Oregon's got. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, and Trayshawn Holden at the perimeter. These are great receivers in their own right. In my opinion, these are 2 of the best receiver rooms in college football. But what separates this one, as good as Jordan James is for Oregon in terms of running the football, to me, the big thing is Ohio State's combination of Judkins and Henderson. And this is the game where the rubber's going to meet the road from a running standpoint. And I think whichever team can dominate the rushing game is going to win this game. I like Ohio State because I think their defense is appreciably better than Oregon. You look at that secondary, Lathan Ransom, Denzel Burke, and, of course, Caleb Downs. This team is tough. They're dangerous. And Dylan Gabriel has a propensity to make a mistake or two. Look, I already have factored in that Will Howard's going to throw a pick in this game. That's what he does. He'll have 1 or 2 balls that are just errant, and they'll get picked off. But really, if you're Oregon, I think they believe they can win. I think the difference is Ohio State knows they can win.
Yeah, and you talk about that Ohio State defense. I mean, this is a team that's second in the country in explosive plays allowed. And one thing about Oregon, believe it or not, folks, is that they are 70th in the country right now in explosive plays on the opposite side of the football. They're 78th, and I'm not the first one to talk about this week, but they're 78th in plays of 20 plus yards or more this season. That certainly doesn't sound like typical Oregon Ducks offensive football. You look at Gabriel, he's just not a strong-armed quarterback. He has his problems trying to throw deep. His red zone interceptions are a problem. He's got 3 in his last 2 games. And what Gabriel needs is separation by his receivers. If he gets that, then he's able to find those targets. But if he's not getting separation from his receivers, he's just not a great quarterback. Now, maybe he comes out on Saturday and all of a sudden we see stuff out of Gabriel that we haven't really seen much in his college career, including here at Oregon. So for me, it's like until Ohio State shows that they've got some holes and leaks on the defensive side of the football, I can't predict that Dylan Gabriel or any quarterback is going to go out there and pinpoint his passes when he hasn't in his entire college career. And again, it's dink and dunk with an occasional downfield throw. But I told you the stats. This isn't an Oregon offense that is able to really completely stretch the field in a consistent manner. So I'm with you here, Amal. I think that Ohio State gets the job done on the road. We're going to turn to the NFL in just a second. Before we do that, Amal, I wanted to let everybody know what you got going this weekend over at DocSports.com.
Yeah, college football coming up. Got a couple of big plays. And then, of course, the National Football League. Got a really good play coming up there, particularly in the NFC South. So looking forward to that one. Should be a ton of fun this weekend. So, now we're starting to get some idea of what these teams are and who's who. And we're starting to kind of separate the contenders and the pretenders at this point in time.
I wanted to let everybody know that it has been a nice run. And in fact, 76% in college football since September 1st. And we clocked that 8-star last week with a sweep, 2 sweeps in a row in college, 7-0 the last 2 weeks. And 39-16 overall as we speak on Wednesday afternoon before any of my games go. And we'll look to rack it up and do it again. 7 stars going to lead the way for me on Saturday in college football and a 6-star in the NFL. I haven't had a 6-star in the NFL for a few weeks now. So we're kind of I like the card this week, put it that way. We got a couple of potentials that'll be 6-star status depending on the line move between now and Thursday afternoon when we release the plays over at DocSports.com. So that's what'll be going on for me on my homepage at DocSports.com. I wanted to mention something real quick. I don't know if you have any Tropicana Hotel stories, and I was going to kind of talk about this at the top of the show, Amal, but I came out here when I was 13 years old, and I stayed the entire summer. I have a brother who's 14 years older than me. I was 13. He was in his late 20s. And he had already moved out here a couple of years prior. And he was working in the collections department as a collections manager at the Tropicana. And I'll never forget, this is one, I might have to do a video or two on this in the next couple of days, because I'm watching at 2:30 in the morning Pacific time, the Tropicana implosion. And I'm just sitting there, just all these memories coming about. And I can remember being 13 at the Tropicana. My brother's getting ready to get off of work. And he introduces me to this old man who's like one of the heads of something at the Tropicana. Obviously, extremely connected. We're talking 1980 when all that good stuff was going on. And he meets me and he's like, "Oh, a brother of Mark Spreitzer," and he's saying this with a real old voice. I'm not going to try to do the voice. The guy had to be 75, 80 years old. And he's like, "Any brother of Mark's who's a son to me is a son to me also." I'm 13 years old. Luigi Piccone hands me his card and he says, "How old are you, son?" And I go, 13. He goes, "If you ever need a woman or a hotel room while you're in town, you let me know. Here's my card." My brother bust out laughing. "Luigi, what are you doing here?" This is my brother from Omaha. He's 13. But just one of a million stories from the Tropicana. I might have to do a video just about the Tropicana and the stories of the old Vegas Strip. But little bit, it's like, bittersweet last night because I'm hoping we get baseball in Las Vegas at that location on the Strip. At the same time, it was tough to see yet another hotel go by the wayside. Anyway, having said that, let's talk some NFL now. The Commanders at the Ravens. Baltimore laying 6.5, 51.5 for the total. And this is one of those things, Amal, that I think if you like Baltimore, you think they're going to win, I should say, outright. You lay the points. Their last 10 wins at home with a healthy Lamar Jackson at the helm, have come by an average of more than 17 points per game. The defense will be the first solid defense, I guess you can call it that, the first since Jaden Daniels faced Tampa Bay back in week 1. They lost that game 37-20. Daniels wasn't bad, but he was a pedestrian 17 for 24 for a $184 through the air. Your thoughts on this battle between the Commanders and the Ravens?
I thought this is a tough game to handicap because the way the Washington offense is playing right now, you feel pretty good with them getting 6.5. On the flip side, I still don't think this Washington defense can stop a lot of people. They look good against Deshaun Watson, but at this point in time, Deshaun Watson should probably be playing in the CFL, not the NFL. And to me, right now, this Ravens team, they have a big propensity to blow leads. We've seen it against the Raiders this year. We've seen this team squander opportunities. They were dominant early on against the Bengals. Bengals fight back in that game. A fortuitous fumble, they win that game in overtime. So if I'm looking at this game, I'd look at the dog because it is an area rivalry. You got Baltimore and Washington, so it should be a ton of fun. But to me right now, I have a hard time confidently taking Washington, and I don't want to lay 6.5 with the way the Commanders are playing right now. I think there's a ton of confidence in Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and I'll tell you what, Scott, I'm high on Brian Robinson. I have been since he came out of Alabama. I really like how hard he runs, but defensively, I've got a lot of questions about that team.
Well-coached team, though. I mean, the Commanders, when you talk about that. However, in this particular game, you got to think the Ravens are going to be used in a whole lot of teasers, 2-team 6-point teasers this week, and knock them down to a half a point. And what's that?
I was going to say, I would prefer to go up, though. If I teasers, I would tend to go up. And the reason I say that is I think there's a greater chance that the Commanders could win the game than losing by 12.5 or 13.
Good point. I lean Ravens here as far as the spread is concerned. So for me, it would be, if I ended up using it as a teaser, it would be lay the half point at this point. And
sure.
But again, totally respecting good points made about your side there. Chargers are at Denver. Now the Chargers laying 2.5 to 3 in this one. Total has come down a couple of points, down to 35.5. Harbaugh has slammed the brakes on the Chargers tempo. No doubt about that. He's doing what he does. They take a ton of time between plays. They run the ball first and foremost. And you look at both of these teams, they're seeing an average of less than 34 points per contest. The Denver games are around 33.5. Chargers just under 30 as far as their combined points with their opponents per week. Last week, you saw 52 points in that Denver game. They win 34-18, but it was a bit misleading. I mean, Denver scores 34 points on just 289 yards of offense, and they're near the bottom of the league in every key offensive category but the defense, especially the secondary, makes up for it all.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, I'll tell you what, Scott, I was surprised to find that the Chargers are road favorite here. I like the situation for them coming off the bye, but I think this Denver team is still pretty good defensively. Now, I don't put a ton of stock into the performance against the Jets because that was a little bit of rain, and also the Jets' offense has a ton of question marks at this point. You pointed out very nicely what the issues were in that game against the Raiders. Raiders had a chance to go up 17, and Gardner Minshew throws a pick six to Surtain, goes 100 back the other way, changed the entire football game. But Scott, this is a tough game. I think the Chargers win, but this is one of those games where they win by 3 or 4 points. This is one right on the road where it's going to come down to the number. It's going to be pretty close. I like the fact that they are coming off of a bye. I think a good coach like Harbaugh against a good coach like Peyton, that additional week of preparation to get your team a little bit more rested helps a lot. And so to me, I would look towards the Chargers here. But generally speaking, I'm a guy who would take the home dog. And I got no argument, none, if anybody wants to take Denver here.
It's funny. I was watching that game last week, and all my games were already in the book. I played all the early games last week, and so I'm sitting there watching, just watching as a fan. I was actually at this point watching with my wife. I had stopped betting in game for the day, the whole thing. And you mentioned it. I mean, they're about to go up 17-0, and Minshew throws one of the worst passes I've seen all season. But it's Minshew-like. In fact, it's Derek Carr-like when he played for the Raiders. It was just a boneheaded pass right to a Denver linebacker or defensive back, I forget which, and he streaks down the field, and all of a sudden it's 10-7. I had no action in the game, and all of a sudden I get just a ton. My phone blows up with about 8 texts from guys I know in my little betting circle, and they're all like, stick a fork in the Raiders. I'm all over Denver the rest of the game. They were absolutely right. They don't have the ability to bounce back from those kind of situations, and Denver, basically dropped the clutch after that particular play, and they go on to get the victory. Lions at Dallas. Lions laying 3, the total 52. A lot of 3.5s on Tuesday night in this one, but most books have dropped it to 3. Those on Detroit can make an argument and cite the fact that they're on a 19-9 spread run on the road under Campbell. They'll talk about their likely advantage in the trenches this week, and those on Dallas will cite Detroit's shortcomings against the pass them all. So this is an interesting battle, and again, the Lions laying 3 on the road.
Yeah, this is an interesting game from a number standpoint. Detroit coming off the bye, just like I mentioned with the Chargers, so that helps them a lot in this game. Detroit's probably the most physical team in the NFL. That trend of playing the Lions and losing the last week continues. The Seahawks lost last week against the Giants. So important game here for Dallas as they have an opportunity after that big win against Pittsburgh. But I'll tell you, Scott, for me, this is a game I'd potentially look at the total over. I think both teams can be able to put up points. You're in Jerry World. No weather being a concern, so you should be able to throw the ball. You mentioned Detroit's ineptitude defensively against the pass. The Lions, they like to go out and score points. And what I mean by that is obviously everybody does, but they don't get into that conservative mode until late in the fourth quarter. They put the pedal to the metal, and sometimes there are some risks that don't pay off with them offensively with the fourth down gambles. But at the same time, those are ones that sustain drives, give you an opportunity to cash in on 6 or 7 points in a drive, assuming the extra point is made. So this is a game where I potentially look at this total, but I think this is one where I hate taking these road teams. I'm more of a dog player in the NFL and college. I like the favorites, but it is hard for me to back Dallas. I'm just not a believer in them. 52.5 is a tricky number, but this could be a high-scoring game. And remember one other thing. With Brett Aubrey at home, as soon as you cross, I will say the 45-yard line, you got 3 points in your back pocket.
Sure. I'll tell you one thing about Dallas. I agree with you on the over on this one. The one thing about Dallas, if you look at how they've done in 5 games going back to last year when they take on a team that gives up more than 5.65 yards per play, they've been able to move the ball and put points on the board. A lot of points, like 35, I think the average is in those games, something along those lines. So I think they're going to be able to move the football, put points on the board. I think Detroit will also. I'm with you. It's a high total at 52, but I think this one goes over the total also. Best bets in a second. Again, a recap of that $60 free account that you see at the top of your screen. If you have yet to become a member at DocSports.com, click on that link below the video, get yourself set up for the free $60 account, and you can use those $60 on any of Amal's daily packages or any of mine. The choice is yours, or mix them up a little bit. Amal, what is the top play out of the Shaw group this week?
Out of the games we discussed, I love Ole Miss. 3.5. I think they're going to win this game comfortably against LSU. LSU just does not have the offensive firepower to keep pace with Ole Miss. And here's the thing with Ole Miss, Scott. They don't have to have an elite defense or a great defense. They just have to have some competency. Because against 9 out of 10 teams, they're going to be able to put up their points. They're going to get into the 30s, into the 40s. Their offense is just too elite. They go at too much of a pace. They put a ton of pressure on you. I like Ole Miss on the road here.
We don't talk about the games before we do the show. I mean, we send the games and say, here's what we're talking about, but we don't tell each other who we're on or who we're not, totals, anything like that before we start the show. And we're going to land, I think the first time this season, we're going to land on our same best bet. I'm going to side with Ole Miss minus the points for all the reasons that you mentioned. And if folks missed it at all, they can go back earlier in the show and check out the reasons why we both like Ole Miss besides what Amal just told you. So we're both on Ole Miss for the best bet. Check out all our plays all week long daily. You got baseball playoffs, which have been as excited as hell. Been loving every day in the baseball playoffs, no doubt about it. Dodgers-Padres series has been gripping. It's been full entertainment since the very start. And of course, you can check out WNBA Finals. NHL's underway. It's all available on our homepages over at DocSports.com. For Amal Shah, I'm Scott Spreitzer. We are against the spread with Spreitzer and Amal. Let's put them in the win column this week, everybody.